All right. You might think after the announcements that I'm perpetually confused, and I was certainly confused as a young adult back in the day by a woman called Madonna, who was a worldwide phenomenon in pop music. She was massive when I was a young adult, and she got there by being outrageously flaunting in ever more provocative kind of ways. It was like nothing was too shocking for this woman to promote herself and her brand, to increase her profile. And you can see a picture up there of her, one of the less provocative photos probably. And what confused me, and it really did at the time, was that quite a lot of my female friends who would have called themselves feminists were great admirers of Madonna. And they used to say things like, we admire this woman because she's taken control of her brand. And she's using her body to, achieve her aims and her goals. She's used her body to create an iconic career. I found that deeply confusing. Somehow, Madonna became a role model for women and a kind of a cultural icon. And of course, we know the path since, which is strewn with the rubble of Justin Bieber and Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton and Miley Cyrus. The list goes on and on and on of people who will do anything to achieve their goals. But you know what? It's not just entertainers. I mean, look at the photos of those politicians up there. Whether you look at Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten, who incidentally, I found out this week, we turned 49 on the same day. And Sophie Quayle also was born on the 12th of May. But anyway, whether you look at Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, you see people who have shrewdly and cold-bloodedly plotted to get to the top. At the very least, they have done whatever it takes to get there. They have, let's face it, lied, deceived. They say things they don't really believe to achieve their current status, all of them. And I don't think that's being too cynical. I'm not a cynical person, but I don't think that's being too cynical. But you know what I discovered? It's not just the rich and famous who do this sort of thing. Ultimately, most people admire success and they want to be successful whatever it takes. And ultimately, the most admired people in our society are the people who get what they set out to achieve. Long after the compromises that they've made have been forgotten, they are admired for the success that they've achieved. People will be celebrating them and their status. That seems to be the way of the world. Well, that may be so, but what would you say if I said to you that Jesus told a story, a parable, where he seemed to celebrate exactly the same thing? Maybe you'd be shocked. What would you say if I said that Jesus told a story where he seemed to encourage people to achieve success any way you can, by being shrewd, by using any skill, any talent to get what we want? Do you believe me? Are you looking at me going, is he trying to trick us? Do you think I'm just being provocative? Well, let's see. Luke chapter 16 is where we are today, and we're going to start from verse 1. Luke chapter 16. Verse 1. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he, that is the rich man, called the manager in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. In Jesus' made-up story, there is a very rich man who is so wealthy that he can kind of stand back from his business and have somebody do the hard work for him. And the manager does all the day-to-day stuff. And the rich man discovers that his manager is actually incompetent, and so he sacks him. But before the manager gets marched out the door, the rich man does something that would be considered unwise in today's business practice. He gives him time, or he instructs him to finalize the accounts of his time, and he gives him some time to do it. Well, let's pick up the story in verse 3. The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." You know, this is a kind of a soft, white-collar kind of guy. You know, he can't work out in the hot Townsville midday sun because he might melt. You know, digging ditches. He's too fancy to go and beg, you know, down in the city or something. But he hatches a plan to secure his future. He knows that his job is done for, so he's really got nothing to lose. So he can use the time that he has to set himself up for the future. Perhaps he can get in the good books with some of his customers so that when he gets thrown out of his current job, he will be provided for. And this is maybe what he was thinking. I need to be welcomed by people into their homes. Who are those people going to be when the whole community knows that I've been thrown out for my incompetence and mismanagement? I know who it will be. It will be the people that I've been working with who owe my master debts. I need a place to live. I need food. I need a future career. I need status. I need to be where I am now. I need to be in important places and in the homes of important people. So he comes up with a plan, and let's read about his plan in verse 5. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and make it 450. What a deal. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light." So the guy has a plan. He's going to contact all the people who owe his master money, and he's going to go through them one by one, and he's going to offer to discount their debt. Pretty shrewd, huh? So the manager cuts a deal, and you can imagine him flouncing into his customers saying, "Have I got a deal for you? Just this month, you can pay a reduced amount on your debt and sign this form, and I will make the rest just disappear." And the idea, of course, was that once he left his current job, these people would owe him something, and they would want to be. He would be in their good books. And in the culture of the time, it was all very much about shame and honor. And you had to honor someone who'd done something for you. And so you're going to use that to look after his future. It was kind of the ultimate, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of scheme. Well, in verse 8, Jesus puts a shock in this parable, which he does quite frequently, we've been finding out. And here's the shock. The master commends the dishonest manager. Why would he do that? What is he praising him for? I mean, he's not praising him for his incompetence. We've already settled that. He's not praising him about his embezzlement and his deception of the owner. I mean, the rich man has presumably lost an enormous amount of money. He's praising him because the dishonest manager acted shrewdly. It's like he's saying, "Well played, sir. Well played. You're a crafty beggar, aren't you?" You see, the manager's job is done for, but you've got to hand it to him. He milked the system for all it was worth, and he paved the way for him to prosper in the future. You know, it reminds me of how politicians behave, getting back to politics. You know, when they have leadership challenges, and they all say things like, "I have no intention to challenge in the near future. I give my commitment." You know, he or she has my complete loyalty. Where have you heard that before? And all the while, after the challenge has been and gone, it comes out that they were plotting all along. And no one ever seems to feel the need to apologise for that. In fact, they all go together onto current affairs shows and Four Corners and stuff, and they all talk about how well organised the plot was and how this is what happened and they did this backroom deal. And you get the impression that they all kind of admire it in a strange sort of way. It's just like that, really, isn't it? There's this kind of admiration for people who will do anything to get what they want. Well, that's the end of the story that Jesus told. Now, I want to say again, this is not just limited to the rich and famous or the high profile. Most people are relatively corrupt. They're all part of how the system works. It's how life is. You secure your future any way you can. And the people who are part of the system are prone to commend the shrewdness and the conniving of a clever person. Well, Jesus' comment on this is pretty amazing. I'll read it again in verse 8. "For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light." And again, you ask the question, what? Is Jesus commending this guy? Like, what is going on here? Why is Jesus commending this? Well, the big answer is that Jesus is showing his followers that focusing on our personal future yields great results. Jesus tells this awful story, and then he subtly changes the focus for his followers, who he calls the sons of light. Listen to what he says in verse 9. "I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." What did this guy do? He used what he had, his assets and the wealth of unrighteousness, to purchase financial security for his earthly future. Jesus says, you need to be at least as thoughtful, at least as shrewd, at least as planning, at least as focused on the future, but your future focus is different. Your future focus is to use wealth, which he calls unrighteous wealth. In the old versions of the Bible, it calls it the mammon of unrighteousness. Isn't that all about idolatry and that sort of stuff? And he makes it very clear that unrighteous wealth is part of this passing world. It's going to be gone. One day there'll be a time when all of that wealth that we've been building up is gone. And Jesus says, you need to use it wisely for an eternal future. If you want to read something interesting, read the second parable in Luke chapter 16, which we're not going to cover today, which shows you how fleeting wealth is and what happens when people get to eternity. Jesus knows that we can't take it with you. We all understand that. But Jesus says, use that unrighteous wealth that in itself has no virtue, but use it to purchase friends who will receive you into the earth, into the heavenly dwellings. What in heaven's name does that mean? I mean, is Jesus proposing that we can somehow use our money to pay for our friends to get out of purgatory or, hell or something? I mean, that sounds like some kind of mad religious scheme invented to, extract money from people, doesn't it? I mean, imagine how much money a church could raise with a scheme like that. No, but let's not read this simplistically. Jesus is actually transforming our thinking about how we use money. He's saying, invest your money in kingdom enterprises that bring about the salvation of others, so that when you get to heaven, there'll be a crowd of people who will welcome you. There'll be a crowd of people who will welcome you. Invest your money in things that bring about eternal benefits, salvation and healing and restoration of people. And that's what we want to do. This is our approach to money as Christians. Let me give you some examples. So, we buy or we rent a home. That's a pretty normal thing that most of us can do. But for the Christian, that home ceases to be an all-consuming kind of temple of security and pride. It becomes a place to welcome people and a sanctuary, to offer sanctuary to people who need encouragement and love. Or we use our cars for personal transport, but if we're thinking the way Jesus is talking about, we use our cars to do humble things like offer a lift for a family that needs to get to church, or to help a neighbour out, or something like that. Bring someone to church. I was thinking about, I love, Tracy Simmons was sharing about the Sandra Jones Centre at the leadership meeting on Thursday night. Every cent that we as a church give to the Sandra Jones Centre is this kind of investment, isn't it? Because those little girls and boys who have been rescued from sexual slavery in Zimbabwe, from abuse, those who receive Jesus in that place, who find the love of Jesus in that place, they will be waiting. They will be waiting, won't they, Morag? And they will receive us. That's the kind of investment Jesus is talking about. We're looking at finding a permanent base for our church, and it'll be a place that will offer love and hope to the community, and that will bless people long after you and I are gone. And funding that potentially is a way to do what Jesus is talking about, to gain friends for ourselves, so that when we get to heaven, we'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. That's what Jesus is talking about. Who knows, if we offer a play group or a youth group or a counselling service or a Christian medical practice or whatever it might be, who will be reached through that. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. That's what we do with our money. That's what Jesus is saying to be shrewd about, to make wise decisions, to plan carefully about. What an amazing thought that our money can do that, don't you think? What an amazing investment that would be. As I said earlier, I turned 49 last week. The reality is that even if I have a long life, I'm halfway there. And eternity is eternity. And this life thing has flown by in a blink. I think I'm still young. The reality is my kids tell me I'm not. I can't believe it. But there's not that much left. But eternity is eternity. And on that final day when my life ends and I'm separated from everything that I leave here, I'm going to find out what is waiting for me in heaven, who will welcome me as a friend. It's an amazing thought, isn't it? What an amazing opportunity we have to invest in eternity, to invest into eternity. Well, it doesn't stop there. Some of us might say, well, I don't give much, but I don't have much. If I had more, I'd give more. No, you wouldn't. You probably wouldn't. You say, well, how do you know that? You don't know me, you don't know my circumstances. Well, Jesus does. In verse 10, he said this, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. Jesus is saying here, it's not about how much we have. It's about who we are. It's about what our priorities are. It's about whether heaven is where our heart is, right? That's what he's saying. Faithful people are faithful people whether they have little or they have a lot. You think about all the people you've known in your life. Faithful people are faithful people whether they have little or a lot. It's never a question of how much we have. If we're concerned about the advance of the kingdom and we're committed to making friends for eternity, we'll give what we have, won't we? And you say, well, I've been hoping to win the lottery. Then I'd be able to give a lot. We don't encourage gambling in this place. But you know what? If you did get a sudden, huge windfall, it wouldn't change your heart. The lottery won't change your heart. Only God can change our hearts, hey? And if our hearts are not towards heaven, then the lottery is just going to conflict us even more, isn't it? Someone said this, you are right now exactly who you are. You are right now exactly who you are. The amount we possess is not the issue. Our character is the issue. Our commitment is the issue. Our love for heaven is the issue. It has nothing to do with an amount. That's a provocative thing to think about, isn't it? Jesus isn't finished with us yet. Let's read from verse 11. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? The way we handle the money and the possessions that God has given us affects our ability to receive the deeper spiritual gifts and insights that the Lord wants to give us. It's like Jesus is saying, if you can't be responsible with the lesser gift of money and possessions, what wise God would give the deeper gifts of the Spirit? That's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? The relationship between the way we handle money and what we receive from the Spirit. Perhaps that was what Jesus meant in Luke 6:38, where he says, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Or perhaps that's what Paul really meant in 2 Corinthians 9, 6 and 7, where he said this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each one should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not out of regret or compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. If we learn anything from this passage, it's that financial blessings that come from the hand of God are the lesser thing compared to the spiritual blessings that come from the same hands. Listen to the postscript from verse 13. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Here's the final summary of this controversial parable. And it's simply saying that God wants single-minded focus on our heavenly future, which results in loyalty and fidelity and faithfulness to Him in this life. There's no room for muddled attempts to sit on the fence and have a bet each way, you know. There's no room to have a foot in each camp. that will result in us being miserable and ineffective, just like those Pharisees who professed such passionate love for God, didn't they? And yet Jesus calls them out, says, you love money, you don't love God, you can't serve both. What a devastating thing to say to a Pharisee, don't you think? Imagine that. I found that a challenge to me. You know, we're all capable of being Pharisees. Do I love money? Do I love God? Can't serve both. I just want to finish with a quote from an old Bible author called A.W. Pink. It's up on the screen. And this is what he said. He said, these orders, that is the order to love God versus money, are diametrically opposed. The one commands you to walk by faith, the other to walk by sight. The one to be humble, the other to be proud. The one to set your affections on things above, the other to set them on the things that are on the earth. The one to look at the things unseen and eternal, the other to look at the things seen and temporal. The one to have your conversation in heaven, the other to cleave to the dust. The one to be careful for nothing, the other to be full of anxiety. The one to be content with such things as you have, the other to enlarge your desires. The one to be ready to distribute, the other to withhold. The one to look at the things of others, the other to look at one's own things. The one to seek happiness in the Creator, the other to seek happiness in the creature. Is it not plain? There is no serving two such masters. Let's pray.